Hello, my name is Rinon, and in one of my earlier videos this week, I showed off my very first clear of an Ultima encounter as a DPS class, which was the Ultima weapon Ultimate on Red Mage, and today we're going to go a little bit more in depth with that about the lessons that I learned about optimizing your damage as a DPS job in these strict encounters, making sure that you are able to build consistency and ensuring that you're the kind of player that any group would love to have. This is going to be formatted a little bit differently to my standard video. I'm actually not going to edit this video at all. It's going to be a single cut of me just talking over the gameplay, discussing what I found out, discussing what tips and tricks that I learned about pushing my damage further as a Red Mage in this encounter. One thing I'd like to note is that while this uses Red Mage as a case study, this will be useful to you even if you do not play Caster or even Red Mage. It will show you that you sometimes need to experiment with your class, and while the balance will teach you things like an optimal rotation and they will give you tips and tricks, you need to also experiment yourself and figure out the nuances of your class in order to optimize yourself around encounters, because encounters have very, very different rules than something like a dummy fight. You need to learn how to deal with downtime, you need to learn how to deal with having to do mechanics at the same time, and that's what makes this game interesting, so I'm going to show you how I dealt with that. Okay, let's get right into it. One thing I'd like to make a note of is if you're not subscribed already, I would absolutely love it if you would subscribe. It will be very helpful to me and I'd be so very thankful of you. Thank you again. So let's go through this phase by phase. We start off with Garuda, and I'm doing what is a pretty standard level 70 opener. You're going to see here that I'm just casting away during my opener, making sure that I get the first displacement off very, very early. And the only difference aside from a normal opener that I'm doing here is I'm making sure that I hold Contra 6. One thing to bear in mind is I'm going to butcher these Red Mage skill names. I don't know how to pronounce them at all. But yeah, I'm holding Contra 6 for the adds, and I'm making sure to get both displacements off in my opener, because level 70 Red Mage does not have the version of displacement that doesn't knock you back, unfortunately. So the adds spawn here, and generally I'm going to make it a goal in this phase to hit 3 GCDs and Contra 6 on both sets of adds that appear. In this case I do so by using Swiftcast. Let me just pause the video here so that we can see what's going on. I do so by using Swiftcast into Scatter, into Verero 2, and then into Scatter again. So that's Swiftcast, Verero 2 and Scatter immediately after my opener finishes, and then I weave in the Contra 6 as well. You want to be extremely careful not to kill the Spiny Plume here, which is why I use a Vacure early when the boss is about to leave, where instead I could have used a damaging skill. It's going to be a small personal loss for me, but it lets the group have more consistency on getting through the mechanic, and I feel that consistency is key in Ultima. Sometimes you have to sacrifice DPS for the greater good, essentially. Okay, so let's press play again. During the next mechanic of Freeing the Fictions, my rotation is really standard. I just build towards the next melee combo. One thing that I really want to emphasize and put into your muscle memory as a Red Mage is that whenever the boss leaves the arena for a GCD, or even for 2 GCDs, it doesn't really matter, which happens very often in Uwu. In fact, it's about to happen in a second, and I'll pause when it does. In these cases, you see here, Garuda leaves, I use a Vacure. What you want to do when the boss leaves is you want to Vacure in order to prepare your dual cast, in order to get an instant hit on the boss's return. I do this here as Garuda prepares to Aerial Blast. Okay, so let's press play again. With these timings, if you have a ninja in your party, they are going to be using Trick Attack here, which is going to allow you to line your melee combos up with it really nicely under Trick, which helps your damage noticeably. I found that during the Mistral Song mechanics that are coming soon, when I started progression for a long time, I'd need to leave my gap closer on cooldown for 5 to even 10 seconds as the mechanic resolved. So I figure out that doing this actually fixes it. I want you to watch here what happens. You watch my gap closer, the re goes off and I gap close straight into the boss and run through him with the rest of my cast. What this allows you to do, let me just pause again so I can explain. The reason I do this is it allows me to use my gap closer almost immediately when it comes back up off cooldown. The feather AoE will be left where I was before I used the gap closer if I wait to hear the sound effect before I press the button, and moving immediately under the boss will allow me to easily dodge any melee feathers. What you want to do when you're progressing any fight, especially an ultimate encounter, is you want to find all the little tech that you can do like this, the little tricks that might seem difficult to do but are very consistent, very simple, and they're going to allow you to get your skills off without losing anything. This is a very good example of that. Okay, so let's press play again. As this second ad phase comes up, I am once again going to be aiming to have 3 GCDs and Contra 6 ready. This time I'm going to be using Scatter and 2 melee AoE skills in order to dump gauge and make my mana nice and fixed to preferably allow me to hit Ifrit at 100. I'm going to pause for a second so I can explain a few things really quickly. At level 70, Manification is very different to the level 80 rendition of the skill in that it does not provide you a short-term damage buff. It simply doubles your mana and puts Core and Displacement back off cooldown. That means you don't really need to keep it perfectly aligned with Embolden, or in fights with awkward downtimes you also don't need to use it immediately on cooldown. That's what I'm doing here. I am not going to be using it immediately on cooldown. Thanks to all the phases and phase transitions in Ultima, the theory I decided to play around with was to aim to have 2 melee combos in every single major burst phase. So that's at the start of Ifrit, at the start of Titan, at the start of Ultima, and then again, finally, as the soft enrage begins at the end of the fight, all of which are under raid buffs. I try to make sure I have 2 melee combos for each and every one of these moments. To manage this quickly and efficiently, I try to go into each of those phases at 100 mana, and I try to make sure I have 1 proc already good to go. I then melee combo, build myself back up to 40 quickly using the proc, hit Manification and melee combo again rapidly. I'm not too sure how other red mages handle it, but this worked out pretty well for me, and it allowed this, which is my very first clear, to be a 94 percentile, just outside of orange, and my second pushed the low orange percentiles at a 95. And honestly, if I'd been potting throughout the whole fight, this probably would have been an orange in and of itself, so I think this is a very decent starting point. That's one of the really interesting things I found about progging on Red Mage. While the job is overall very simple to pick up and play, it falls behind very quickly if there's too much chaos going on in a pull. While the res is not going to make you run out of MP, and you can do it quickly and efficiently more so than any other job, it will run the risk of delaying your melee combo so much that you can't easily get it under raid buffs anymore. Lacking confidence in your cast can do the same, and it feels like one of the biggest things that costs you DPS on the whole as a red mage is allowing your melee combo to not line up nicely with raid buffs. So I made it a point, I made it my main goal to try to make sure that that did not happen. This run is not ideal because we end Garuda and my mana is 95-86, but we're gonna try and make it work. We go into Ifrit with dual cast procced once again and proceed to dump our gauge as soon as the boss is targetable again, which is going to happen in a second. This is where I'm going to use Embolden, and the rest of the group has held their buffs such as Chain and Technical Step to line up and allow us to hit the boss hard as soon as he spawns. Ifrit is a little bit of a difficult phase for Red Mage for 2 specific mechanics alone, Infernal Nail and Eruption, and both of these happen back to back, which is unfortunate because Red Mage really does not have the sustained mobility to deal with either of these mechanics, let alone one after another. Nails are about to spawn now, so I'm going to pause the video and talk about why that is and how we decided to deal with it. So basically, if you have to deal with both of these mechanics, at some point you're going to end up AFKing, not casting, and just doing the mechanic because the uptime requirements are exceptionally tight on Red Mage. Luckily, depending on your comp, there is almost always something you can do to deal with these mechanics more effectively. In my case, we had triple ranged. We had a dancer, myself, and a black mage. So as a result, we traded off responsibilities to allow each of us to lose as little as possible. The dancer has free movement, so we had them deal with both mechanics. Makes sense, right? but for the Black Mage, we allowed them to stockpile Triple Cast and Swift Cast, which allows them to sort out one of the two mechanic sequences without losing very much. And for our Black Mage, it lined up nicely to have him bait the eruptions after Nails, which was ideal for me as well, because my melee combo came up there and I wanted to be on the boss, not just AFKing doing Nails. That leaves me to deal with the Infernal Nails earlier in the phase. Even with me only having to deal with one of the two mechanics, it's still very tight. So if we press play again here, you're going to see I keep Swift Cast on the back burner, and I time my dual cast perfectly to allow me to use it while moving, and then I go into Swift Cast to keep casting, and only at the end for the last AoE do I actually have to sacrifice any uptime, and it's equivalent to just clipping my GCD rather than using an entire one for nothing, which is a big gain from what it could have been, I think. Aside from that, the rest of Ifrit is very, very standard. You're just going to see the fundamentals here. I'm just going to be using my rotation, doing my melee combo under buffs, and doing the mechanics. We're once again, at the end of the phase, going to build to 100-100 and prepare for Titan. I start off Titan the exact same way as Ifrit. I use Embolden, and I make sure to open with 2 melee combos back to back in order to burst as much as possible. This is also going to be the point in the encounter where I start playing a lot more conservatively with my displacements. At level 70, displacement is your only option for that cooldown, and I do not want to risk missing a heal or backflipping to my doom, so I sacrifice the ability from that point onwards. I don't really do too much special for the rest of Titan, but there are 2 specific points where I feel I mess up in this POV, and I'm going to showcase them when we get to it. The first one, you'll see it soonish, is the healer jail. In an ideal world, I would just finish the melee combo that I started, and the finisher will be prepped and ready to go for when the jail becomes targetable. Watch for it when it happens. This allows me to not stop my rotation and keep doing damage more effectively, but our monk dies a little earlier in the phase, as you will have just seen, and I wanted to make sure that we had enough burst to nuke the jail quickly, so I played very, very safely, and it was to my own detriment. So now we're just doing the landslides, and you'll get to see the healer jail very soon, basically. We have to do another res, we have a tank death as well as the monk death. So you see here, I start my melee combo, I do the first 2 hits, and then I wait. Realistically and ideally, I would have hit that button, I would have thundered and then used Contra 6 on the jail, and that should have been enough. The second time that I kind of mess up is at the end of the phase. I sit on 100 gauge for the last 10 to 15% of the boss's HP, and I honestly believe that I could have used melee combo and then pushed to build my gauge back up quickly if I had made the choice quick enough instead of just dilly-dallying. Neither harmed the group, but both of them definitely harmed my personal damage in this phase and would not have hurt the group if I did it. So those are definitely things for me to bear in mind for the future. So you see here I'm at 198 and the boss is at 15%. Instead of casting, I should have melee comboed and built the mana back up. You'll see how many casts I get here and during the intermission that could have been building me additional gauge. As we transition over to Ultima, I don't do too much special, I don't do any crazy tech here. I just follow the core rules of the class, play super safe and do the fundamentals well. This is to make sure that I can give people nice callouts and allow them to follow the marker to the safe spot as much as possible. You see here in the opener, I do the 2 melee combo opener that I've talked about a few times. For those of you that are playing different jobs, the overall rules of optimization in a fight like Ubu are pretty simple. First of all, you want to try not to lose a single usage of your skills over the course of the fight. Generally in Uwu you can achieve this by hitting everything on cooldown aside from your Rager raid buffs, Major, not Rager, Jesus, which you save for specific fight intervals to line up with the rest of your party. Then you want to line up your raid buffs with the rest of your group, which can really easily be achieved by a quick discussion with your team in between pulls. You sort out when you want to use your burst, make sure everyone is in agreement and just execute it from there. Figure out ways to allow you to not break your rotation throughout all of the downtimes and to burst as much as possible under buffs. Because all 3 ultimates honestly have very split phases interlaced with small sequences of uptime, it's often going to be possible for you to line yourself up in such a way that whenever the boss returns, you have resources to dump and some burst to give to make sure that you're pushing out as much damage as possible during those precious few moments you get free damage. The last one is please play safe, play very safe. Remember, this is an ultimate encounter. These are 15 minutes long at the shortest and the longer ones are 18 plus minutes long. Progression and clearing comes before anything else. It comes before your log, it comes before your personal goals for that encounter, anything. Clearing and prog comes first. Sometimes you are going to be the person that has to lose damage in order to allow for ease of healing or to mechanically be consistent and enable you to get through the mechanic regularly. Sometimes you'll have to take a loss to give somebody else a gain. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, that's good team play, and that's par for the course in Ultimate. And being too greedy is often a poor trait of a player in these fights. You don't want to be the guy constantly wiping to greed, and you don't want to be the guy arguing with your group because you lost a tiny bit of damage to allow them to get through a mechanic consistently. I do think that going forward, as I learn more encounters as different roles, which I'm going to make a goal to do, I'm going to try and put out videos that go very, very in detail on how to make the most of your job in these fights. I hope this was a little bit useful to you at least. Even if you don't play Red Mage or even you don't play Caster at all, I hope it helped you learn some of the thought processes that I use to optimize the jobs that I play. Thank you so much for watching and I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day.